What would you risk to uncover the truth buried in your past, especially if it meant facing the last person you ever wanted to depend on? Welcome to Happiness of Love, your daily dose of K-dramas. Get ready to fall in love with unforgettable stories. Can you tell us where are you listening from? The rain poured down like a vengeful torrent, each drop pounding against the pavement as if mockingly Minji's shattered life. The flickering neon lights of the city reflected in the puddles, distorting the world into a chaotic blur, much like her thoughts. Standing outside the once familiar apartment building, she felt it slip away more than just physically. It was the climax of her struggles, the moment she had feared but could never quite prepare for. Just days ago, she thought she could manage the tide of adversity, but now, uncertainty gripped her heart like a vice. Her grandmother's frail figure flashed through her mind, and the realization that there would be no safe haven for them sent shivers down her spine. With volatile emotions coursing through her veins, Minji clenched her fists at her sides. She could no longer endure the gnawing dread, the suffocating knowing that she had nowhere to turn. Through sheer determination, she had built a life governed by hard work and perseverance, a life that now lay in ruins. Suddenly, the towering presence of K Group's headquarters loomed before her, a stark reminder of everything she loathed and needed in equal measure. The sleek glass facade sparkled ominously as if whispering taunts about the arrogance inside. Kim Jae-won, the man who viewed her as nothing more than an insignificant nuisance, was her last resort. Swallowing her pride, she turned toward the entrance, her heart pounding in her chest like a war drum. Inside, the opulence was staggering, an extravagant chaos of laughter, clinking glasses, and tailored suits. This was a world she felt utterly alien in, yet it was also the very world that had discarded her, further fueling her resolve. Each step sank deeper into the quagmire of her emotions. She spotted Jae-won at the center of the gala, draped in confidence as effortlessly as the exquisite suit he wore. The contrast was stark. While he thrived among the elite, she felt dwarfed by the magnitude of his presence and the abyss of her own desperation. Summoning her courage, she navigated through the crowd, the perfume of wealth and power stinging her senses. When Jae-won finally turned to face her, his sharp gaze skimmed over her, distilling her into what he saw as a minor inconvenience. Minji opened her mouth, her voice nearly lost amidst the festivities, as she declared her need for help. But her plea fell like a stone in stagnant water. He chuckled dismissively, his words slicing through the air with a bite that echoed in her ears. "What makes you think you deserve my attention?" Her face flushed with humiliation, yet buried beneath the embarrassment was a burgeoning fire. She adjusted herself, maintaining eye contact, daring him to see the resilience behind the hurt. "I deserve the opportunity to survive," she countered, her tone steady and unwavering. Gasps rippled through the crowd as whispers flared like wildfire. She was aware of the piercing gazes and judgment surrounding her, but in that moment, survival outweighed all else. Just as the tension peaked, a sudden crash shattered the atmosphere, a flurry of chaos as champagne glasses spilled across the marble floor. Minji felt a rush of adrenaline as shards of glass glinted dangerously around her. People screamed, and instinctively, she lunged forward, reaching for an unseen figure teetering on the edge of the balcony. It was Jae-won. His eyes widened in disbelief as he lost his balance, grasping at thin air. In that split second, their fates intertwined. She saved him, and a palpable jolt of electricity surged between them as their hands collided in a fierce grip. It was not just a life-threatening moment, it was the crazy twist of destiny that pulled them together in a way they never expected. With his breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps, Jae-won stared at her, his icy demeanor faltering just a fraction, the realization dawning that she had become more than just a desperate beggar. As the commotion began to recede, the shift in their dynamic hung heavy in the air, a silent acknowledgement that neither was ready to confront. Minji's heart raced not just from fear, but from an unfamiliar stirring within her, a tug she refused to name. This man who had once felt like an insurmountable wall now seemed to be the key to unlocking mysteries buried in shadows. All she had to do was step beyond the thin line of disdain and desperation. A 6-month contract loomed in her mind, not just as a lifeline, but as a complex dance of trust they were yet to begin. As they stood at the precipice of their future, the uncharted territory of what was to come loomed ahead, marked by danger, attraction, and an undeniable connection neither dared to explore. Desperate and out of options, Lee Minji stormed into the high society gala, her damp clothes clinging to her skin, the sound of her racing heart drowned out by the laughter and chatter of souls elite reveling in their world of wealth and power. Surrounded by sparkly gowns and sharp suits, she felt like a dark cloud in a sunlit sky, an eyesore against the backdrop of extravagance that sprawled before her. The soft glow of chandeliers illuminated the polished floors, but their warmth felt distant, cold against her mounting anxiety as judgmental stares pierced through her like daggers. Ignoring the scandalous whispers that rose like foul smoke around her, she wove through the crowd with her head held high and her heart heavy, a woman with no choice but to confront the man who held the key to her last hope, Kim Jae-won. the untouchable CEO of K Group. As she approached, he stood tall in his tailored black suit, exuding an aura of confidence that made him an unassailable figure among the influential faces orbiting him, each one eager for a chance to bask in his spotlight. Minji's pulse quickened as she dropped to her knees before him, her trembling hands clutching the foreclosure notice that had become her lifeline, the tremor in her voice betraying her resolve as she pleaded for his assistance. She spoke of desperation, of loss, of being pushed to the brink, but his response was an icy cascade of rejection. "People like you always appear when they need money." "I'm not a charity," he declared, the coolness in his tone striking her like a physical blow, met with cruel laughter and mocking exchanges from the guests who thrived on her humiliation. Each word echoed painfully, sending her spirit spiraling down into the depths of despair, as the room she had dared to infiltrate closed in around her, a living entity that relished her downfall. Just as the weight of her vulnerability threatened to crush her entirely, she felt the grip of security tightening, ushering her toward the door, and her dignity shattered like glass as she was forcefully ejected from the opulence that felt like a dream, a nightmare more than the harsh reality. The rain-soaked pavement became her only refuge, the cold concrete a stark contrast to the warmth of the gala she had so desperately tried to penetrate. As she lay there, abandoned and shamed, Minji couldn't suppress the wave of humiliation and despair that washed over her. Her pleas had fallen on deaf ears, and all that remained was the sound of the rain mingling with her defeated sobs, the world spinning indifferently around her as she grappled with the realization that she had just become a mere footnote in the life of the man she had once sworn she would never need. Just when Lee Minji thought the night couldn't get worse, the world dimmed around her, the lights from the high society gala fading into the shadows of the dreary streets. The sharp drizzle transformed into a torrential downpour, blurring her vision as she stumbled away from the mocking laughter of the elite who had just witnessed her humiliating plea for help. Clenching her fists, she felt the weight of her failures pressing down on her, and as she turned, headlights sliced through the darkness. A sleek black car barreled down the slick road, and in that heart-stopping moment, her body froze, paralyzed by disbelief as it inched closer, the impending disaster looming like a cruel specter. Just when she thought fate had dealt her the final blow, a strong hand grasped her wrist, yanking her away from the oncoming vehicle with an urgency that left her gasping. She crashed against a solid chest, the warmth of the body contrasting sharply with the cold rain soaking her through. Looking up, she found herself face to face with the very man who had just dismissed her as insignificant, Kim Jae-won, the ice-cold CEO of K Group, whose seemingly impenetrable demeanor began to unravel before her eyes. His grip on her was firm, yet there was an odd softness in the way he held her, as if a part of him recognized the desperation that clung to her like the drenching rain. For a fleeting moment, something flickered in his stormy gaze. Was it instinctive concern or a glimmer of undeniable humanity? She could hardly bear the weight of that thought, her heart racing not just from the near accident but from the confusion surrounding him. Yet, before she could process what had just happened, he stepped back, composing himself as though their moment was nothing but a mere inconvenience. He adjusted his immaculate suit, the fabric slipping effortlessly over his broad shoulders, and, in a voice as cold as the rain, commanded his driver, "Take her home. I don't want to see her again." The sleek car drove off into the night, its wheels splashing through the puddles left by the relentless rain, leaving Minji drenched and bewildered. With her mind spiraling in confusion, she could hardly grasp what had just transpired. Why had he saved her, only to cast her aside so ruthlessly? As the distant sounds of laughter faded, an unsettling certainty wrapped around her heart. There was something deeper binding her to this man than she had ever fathomed. The night's bitterness settled in her chest, intensifying the chilling realization that saving her could very well mean dragging her into the very world she loathed, a world entwined with the dark legacy of her father's past and the man who had just pulled her from the jaws of danger, yet made her feel even more insignificant with his dismissal. Fate had twisted yet again, binding her to Kim Jae-won at the most precarious intersection of their lives. As the rain pelted down and soaked her resolve like the fabric of her dress, she felt the stirring of something unexpected within her, an undeniable connection that contradicted everything she thought she knew. With her heart pounding in her chest, Minji clenched her teeth, vowing that she would not be defeated by Jae-won or by her chaotic circumstances. She only had to keep her eyes on the unfolding mystery of her father's death and the corporate shadows that loomed over them both. Perhaps, just perhaps, this twisted fate held the keys to uncovering more than just her past. It could open doors to truths she had yet to imagine, truths that could either strengthen the bond she reluctantly felt forming between herself and Jae-won or tear them apart in ways she could not yet foresee. The storm raged on, both outside and within, as Minji took a deep breath and prepared to face whatever came next, determined to conquer the challenges ahead. The next morning, Minji awoke to the sharp trill of her phone, its sound echoing in the dimness of her cramped hotel room, a reminder of the chaotic life she was now navigating alone. Her heart raced as she checked the caller ID. K Group headquarters. Confusion washed over her, mingled with a sense of unease as she recalled the gala where she had pleaded for help from the unyielding figure of Kim Ji-won. Hesitantly, she answered, her voice slightly trembling, curious yet cautious about this unexpected communication. The voice on the other end was professional and stern, instructing her to come in for a meeting. With a mix of anticipation and dread swirling in her stomach, she dressed quickly, smoothing down her wrinkled blouse and stepping into her only pair of sensible shoes. When she arrived at the towering skyscraper, its glass facade glinting in the morning sun, it loomed over her like a giant monolith of wealth and power, an intimidating reminder of what she had unceremoniously barged into the night before. As she was escorted through the sleek, minimalist hallways adorned with modern art, each step felt heavier than the last, the faint scent of luxury wafting around her. The receptionist's polite smile was a stark contrast to her own internal turmoil, and as she reached Ji-won's office, her pulse quickened. The doors swished open, revealing a space that screamed affluence with its dark wood furnishings and expansive view of the city below. Ji-won sat behind a formidable desk, his posture commanding, eyes fixed on her, exuding an air of indifference that made her stomach churn. This was the man who had humiliated her just hours ago, and now he was her only lifeline. She could see the subtle shadows under his eyes, hints of weariness beneath his sharp exterior, but they meant little in the grand scheme of things. Before she could muster an adequate greeting, he spoke, his voice smooth yet cold, devoid of warmth. Work for me for 6 months. I'll pay you enough to settle your debts and take care of your grandmother, he stated, the proposal hanging heavily in the air. For a heartbeat, silence enveloped them, the weight of his offer hitting her like a sudden gust of wind. Stunned, Minji blinked at him, her mind reeling, searching for sanity in his words. Why would you even do that? She questioned, the incredulous tone slipping through her lips, fueled by a blend of disbelief and irritation. His gaze was unwavering, the corners of his mouth betraying the slightest smirk as he replied with a dismissive wave of his hand, consider it an exchange. Minji's instincts flashed a warning, telling her that nothing he offered came without strings attached. Still, as the realities of her financial desperation loomed larger, that gut feeling was drowned out by the need to survive. What exactly do you want from me? She pressed, knowing all too well that this was a game of power, one she had already inadvertently found herself ensnared within. But Ji-won merely leaned back in his chair, a glint of amusement dancing in his eyes, and remained enigmatic, further tightening the web in which she was caught. With no other recourse available, she forced a nod, the weight of her acceptance pressing down on her spirit, the promise of stability mingling with an imminent chaos she couldn't yet grasp. As she stepped out of his office, her mind buzzed incessantly with questions and doubts. There was an unsettling feeling twinging in her gut, a shadow whispering that this deal was riddled with complexities she had yet to understand. As she walked away from the imposing skyscraper, the sound of her footsteps echoing in her ears, Minji couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle had only begun. Her resolve would be tested not just by the demands of this new job but by the inescapable truth that she was becoming tangled in Ji-won's world, a precarious dance infused with intrigue, power, and an undeniable attraction she was not prepared to confront. Thrown into a high-pressure corporate world, Lee Minji struggles to adapt to her new role as Kim Ji-won's personal assistant, feeling like a fish out of water among the polished employees who parade their superiority with every dismissive glance. The walls of K Group's headquarters, with their sleek marble finishes and glass facades, tower over her, much like the expectations that seem to press down on her shoulders. Day after day, she battles insurmountable tasks, often designed to test her resolve, and with each challenge thrown her way, she feels the weight of her vulnerabilities amplified. But in those moments of relentless exhaustion, she can't shake the feeling that Ji-won, watching from his glass-walled office, finds amusement in her plight. Yet, there are fragments of his attention that linger a moment too long, hinting at a hidden intrigue that confuses her even more, a hint of a hidden depth beneath the cold, calculated exterior that she is desperate to break through, even if she knows the odds are against her. One fateful evening, while meticulously organizing a mountain of files in Ji-won's opulent office, the fluorescent lights create a sterile ambience that contrasts sharply with the turmoil swirling inside her. As her fingers graze over the contents of a seemingly innocuous folder, she feels a chill run down her spine. The familiar name at the top makes her heart race, the documents bearing her late father's name. Her breath catches as she realizes that within these pages lie details of the investigation into his tragic death, a revelation that ignites a torrent of questions, each more desperate than the last. Why? Why would Ji-won be researching her father? Had he uncovered something that could give her the answers she has sought for so long? That question drives her to confront Ji-won with a mixture of fear and determination, her heart pounding as she marches into his office, ready to demand the truth he withholds. She meets his gaze, and for the briefest moment, the tension dances in the air, a clashing of wills. When she finally speaks the words that have been threatening to spill from her lips, Jaiwan merely leans back in his chair, a knowing smirk playing across his lips as if he relishes the game they are now engaged in. "I was curious about how long it would take you to find that," he says cryptically, his voice calm yet laden with an intensity that sends shivers down her spine. He seems to enjoy the dance of secrecy, but she is not about to back down. The fire in her grows stronger as she realizes that this knowledge could be the key to untangling the web that ensnares them both. That smirk ignites a resolve within her. No longer will she be the victim of circumstance. She is determined to uncover the truth that connects their fates, even if that means navigating through layers of deception he represents. And as she stands there, anchored in her quest for answers, she feels the tides shifting around them, drawing them both into a murky world of corporate corruption and hidden betrayals that threatens to consume them as much as it smiles upon them. As Minji delved deeper into the murky waters of her father's past, her heart raced with both anticipation and trepidation. The weight of the truth, once a distant murmur in her mind, now loomed large, threatening to consume her. Just as she began to unravel clues from the corporate labyrinth that was K Group, her phone buzzed violently against her skin, shattering her concentration. With trembling hands, she answered, feeling an icy dread creep up her spine when a distorted voice emerged from the other end, chilling her to the core. "Stop looking into the past, or you'll regret it." The voice was devoid of any human warmth, echoing through her mind like an ominous warning. What had initially felt like an isolated case of corporate malfeasance had quickly transformed into a sinister game, and someone was watching her every move, eager to silence the truth. Minji's breath quickened, panic swirling within her as she considered the implications of the call. It was no longer just her father's memory she was fighting for, it was her life, too. Gathering her scattered thoughts, she continued her investigation, each discovery more shocking than the last. Her research revealed an intricate web of financial crimes linking Kim Tae-hwan, the elusive former chairman and Jaiwan's father, to activities far more nefarious than she had ever imagined. She found evidence suggesting that Tae-hwan had played a pivotal role in orchestrating the cover-up surrounding her father's death, a revelation that ignited a wildfire of fury and determination within her. In her pursuit for answers, Minji finally confronted Jaiwan, aiming to strip away the facade of indifference he wore like armor. The atmosphere in his sleek office was thick with unspoken tension as she glared at him, her voice unwavering despite the racing pulse in her chest. "Your father covered up my father's death, didn't he? I deserve to know the truth." The words hung heavily between them, cracking the veneer of Jaiwan's cold exterior for the first time. She saw the flicker of emotion flash across his face, a brief glimpse into the turmoil hidden beneath. "There are things you're better off not knowing," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper, betraying a hint of anxiety as though he were reminding himself as much as her. Minji's resolve hardened at his warning. She could sense the fear cloaked beneath his insistence to steer her away from the truth, and it sparked an indignant fire inside her. She was no longer the timid girl trying to claw her way out of despair. Swallowing her fear, she declared that if her father's death wasn't an accident, then she would unearth who was responsible, no matter the cost. She locked eyes with Jaiwan as a fierce determination settled within her, a silent battle raging in their gazes. At that moment, amidst all the corporate power plays and deceptions, they stood united in a single, unspoken truth: Minji would not back down, and Jaiwan, despite his reluctance, would eventually find himself drawn deeper into her fight. Only time would reveal whether they would emerge unscathed from this dangerous game, but as the shadows lengthened around them, forming an almost tangible barrier, Minji felt an involuntary connection grow between them, a bond forged in the fire of turmoil that neither could fully grasp yet. With the walls of K Group closing in, and the threat of the past looming closer, she realized that the journey towards the truth would test not only her strength but Jaiwan's as well, forcing them to carve out a path through a labyrinth filled with corporate corruption and the ghosts of their fathers. They were stepping into the unknown together, and with every secret unraveling, the stakes continued to rise, enveloping them in a whirlwind of danger that neither had anticipated. As the tension between Lee Minji and Kim Jaiwan deepened, the air around them crackled with a mix of fear and determination. Unbeknownst to them, each step they took toward uncovering the dark web spun by Jaiwan's father, Kim Tae-hwan, brought them closer not only to the truth but also to an undeniable bond. Minji sat across from Jaiwan in the sleek, minimalistic office that had once felt like a prison to her. With the walls adorned with charcoal gray accents and the city skyline towering beyond the glass, she felt a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Jaiwan gestured toward a stack of documents on his polished mahogany desk, asserting with a conviction that drowned out her trepidation that they had made significant progress in their clandestine investigation. He said that they needed to approach this with laser focus and reminded her that his father had deftly eluded justice for far too long. But collaboration between two people like them was fraught with complications. Minji's hands trembled slightly as she pointed out a peculiar discrepancy in a financial report, the pit of her stomach tightening with the realization that the evidence they gathered not only implicated Taehwan but could also shatter Jaiwon's perception of family. Despite her hesitations, the glimmer of resolve in her eyes spoke of a burgeoning strength, one that Jaiwon found himself reluctantly admiring. He said that their alliance was not merely tactical, it was personal now, driving her closer to a goal that felt almost within reach but poised to slip away as darkness began to encroach upon them. The late afternoon sun seeped through the office windows, casting long shadows that mirrored the rising tension. As they worked side by side, Jaiwon's mind drifted back to their first encounter, the sting of her humiliation at the gala still fresh in his memory. They were two worlds apart then, and yet here they were, tangled in a partnership born of necessity and, slowly, reluctant respect. But every ounce of determination soon spiraled into a precarious dance with danger. The feeling that someone was watching them battering the walls of Jaiwon's composed exterior. Just days after the initial breakthrough, while exiting a coffee shop near the office, they noticed an unfamiliar car parked across the street. Jaiwon whispered that it was too conspicuous, the driver's eyes hidden behind aviator sunglasses but unmistakably trained on them, intensifying the sense of urgency. Minji felt her heart race. The stakes had escalated far beyond what she had expected. What ensued was a race to stay one step ahead of the looming threats that now stalked them. Each phone call they made, each document they shared during late-night sessions at Jaiwon's high-security office, was seasoned with unease. Late into the night, when the city fell silent except for the distant hum of vehicles, Jaiwon became increasingly agitated. In moments of solitude, when Minji had stepped out for a much-needed breath of fresh air, he could feel the shadows closing in on him not just from the outside, but from within. He had dismissed Minji as insignificant in the beginning, and yet, here she was, carving out a space in his heart that frightened him. Realizing he was developing feelings for someone he had vowed to keep at a distance altered the very game they were playing. In one unsettling moment, as they pored over freshly printed documents in the dim office light, the unmistakable sound of shattering glass from the window sent shivers down their spines. Minji froze, her hand clutching the edge of the desk, while Jaiwon's expression turned to one of fierce protectiveness. He immediately stood between her and the source of the sound, instinctively using his body as a shield, though they both knew this was another manifestation of the corporate war being waged around them. In that harrowing instant, the barriers they had each constructed began to tremble. Jaiwon turned to Minji, his voice low and urgent as he said that they needed to leave now, that the danger was no longer a distant threat but an immediate reality. He was no longer just a cold CEO, he was a man willing to safeguard the woman whose tenacity had begun chipping away at his emotional armor. As they exited the office hustling through the back corridors, their hearts pounded in sync, their senses heightened, blending adrenaline and apprehension into something potent. Unknown to them, the figure trailing them was not solely intent on carrying out orders, it was a warning that both Jaiwon and Minji's lives were now intertwined within the labyrinth of Taehwan's empire and that their discovery of the truth came at an escalating price. Each close call pulled them more deeply into a world where trust became a weapon and desire, a hidden liability. As the stakes rose, so did the enigmatic connection between them, an electricity neither could ignore despite the chaos raging outside. Trust would be a currency they had yet to master, but with the shadows encroaching upon them and secrets yearning to be unearthed, their fates were inextricably linked or perhaps, tethered to a darkness neither fully comprehended. The night air was thick with tension as Minji and Jaiwon sprinted through the dimly lit alleyways of Seoul, their footsteps echoing against the cobblestones like a heartbeat quickening in fear. They had gathered enough evidence to take down the corruption plaguing K-Group, but it seemed the deeper they delved, the more dangerous it became. Minji's heart raced not just from the physical exertion but from the weight of their situation, a situation that brought her closer to the man she had sworn to resist. She glanced at Jaiwon, his expression a mix of determination and uncertainty, revealing a flicker of vulnerability she had never seen before. They were now allies, bound by necessity, but the intimacy of their forced closeness ignited turmoil within her. "We can't stop now," he said, his voice low but firm, cutting through the sudden stillness surrounding them. The street lamps flickered above them like outer space, illuminating their path momentarily but unable to stave off the looming dread that hung in the air. With no allies to turn to, desperation led them to a cluster of journalists who had been waiting for a scandal to break. Minji felt the rush of adrenaline at the thought of confronting the truth, the thrill of the hunt replacing her earlier despair. Together, they leaked key evidence to the press, crafting a narrative that showcased the corruption within K-Group, an act of rebellion that shifted the power dynamics of their predicament. As they did, a surge of empowerment filled her. She could almost hear her father's encouraging voice in her ears, urging her to fight for justice, reminding her of the strength she always had hidden within. Jaiwon, a man who had been a stranger until recently, stood beside her, mirroring the same conviction she felt, and for the first time, she didn't view him as merely a cold-hearted CEO. "If this works, we might just have a fighting chance," he said, the tension in his voice hinting at the stakes that lay before them. But as they reveled in the hope their risky move offered, a sudden betrayal shattered their fragile alliance. A familiar figure emerged from the shadows, one they had believed to be on their side. It was Eugen, her face a mask of anger mixed with betrayal, her demeanor calculating as ever. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" she said, her voice cold and laced with disdain, each word slicing through the air like a dagger aimed at their ambitions. The look in her eyes sent a shiver down Minji's spine, understanding that their gambit had triggered a fierce backlash from those in power, and that Eugen had set in motion a hostile retaliation. Everything they had worked for was at risk of crumbling before them, and the realization struck hard. Betrayal wasn't just an external foe, but also something lurking within those they had trusted. In a fleeting moment of panic, Jaewon turned to Minji, his features stealing into a resolute mask that reminded her of the Kim Jaewon everyone feared. "We need to move now," he said, urgency tinging his tone as he tightened his grip on her hand, his warm palm anchoring her momentarily amidst the chaos. They raced through the labyrinth of the city, their breaths mingling in the cold night air, the sounds of pursuit echoing ominously behind them, heavy with threats unspoken. Minji's mind raced, the shadows of their past lurking along the dimly lit streets as they sought refuge in an unmarked doorway that led into a cramped alley. She felt the ghost of her father's guiding presence, giving her the courage to push through her fears. She didn't know how much danger awaited them, but behind her, she could hear the faint sounds of footsteps growing louder. Their enemies were gaining ground. Jaewon pressed his back against the wall, his expression shifting from one of leadership to one of vulnerability that unnerved her. The danger had wound itself around them like a vine, constricting, and for a brief moment, their fates were inexorably intertwined. As they caught their breath, the weight of their uncertainty pressed down upon them, and Minji dared to glance at Jaewon, the tension palpable between them. "What if this is the end?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, her heart racing with fear and possibility. He looked at her, those usually cold eyes glistening with determination. "We won't let it be," he said resolutely, his grip reassuring her that together, they could still navigate the treachery ahead. In that fragile moment, as vulnerability flowed between them, it became evident that their bond was not just one of survival, but of awakening feelings neither had anticipated. Minji could hardly believe it as the world around them faded, leaving only the two of them amidst the turmoil ready to face whatever lay ahead. Yet, as enemies closed in, she realized that time was running out, and they needed to unravel the secrets surrounding them before it consumed them both entirely. The air was thick with tension as the walls of the courtroom echoed with whispers of scandal and corruption. Kim Tae-hwan, once the revered chairman of K Group, sat at the front, his demeanor calm and unyielding, as he scanned the room with a practiced indifference. Minji could feel her heart race, adrenaline surging through her veins. Every instinct told her that this moment might finally bring the resolution she had fought so hard to achieve. The courtroom was filled, not just with legal representatives, but also with journalists and the elite who had gathered to witness this turning point. Minji's gaze shifted to Jaewon, who stood beside her, a storm brewing behind his stoic facade. He was not just a CEO in this moment, he was a son grappling with the legacy of a man who had deeply scarred his life and the lives of others, including Minji's. Their hands brushed briefly, a silent testament of alliance, and Minji felt a rush of warmth at the contact. A memory of their late-night discussions and the comfort they found in each other's presence surged through her. As the proceedings commenced, Tae-hwan's lawyer rose, spinning tales of redemption and negotiations, claiming that Tae-hwan was willing to cooperate with the authorities by revealing high-profile names involved in a much larger conspiracy. Tae-hwan's eyes glinted coldly as he leaned forward, a mocking smile playing on his lips. He relished the thought of bargaining his way out of incarceration, his voice smooth as silk as he presented his offer. Yet, Minji felt a shiver run down her spine. She sensed the dangerous games he was still willing to play. She turned to Jaewon, feeling the weight of shared determination between them. Jaewon's jaw clenched, the flicker of steel in his eyes mirrored the resolve that had blossomed between them in their struggle against the shadows of their pasts. He whispered fiercely, urging her to stay focused, reminding her of the stakes at hand, the lives they needed to protect from Tae-hwan's manipulations, and the truth they had fought to unveil. Together, they had amassed evidence, testimonies, and a public sentiment ripe for justice, all of which could not be merely swept under the rug in exchange for a reduced sentence gifted to a man who had operated in darkness for too long. As Minji's voice rose against the backdrop of the grandiose courtroom, she could feel the shifts in the air, the weight of her words igniting a fervor among those present. She spoke of the countless lives impacted by Tae-hwan's ruthless decisions, peeling back the layers of his deception and proclaiming her father's unyielding spirit a victim of corporate greed that could no longer be forsaken. Her passion lit a fire in the hearts of those who listened, and the murmurs grew. She could feel the tide turning. The prosecution, now confronted with undeniable evidence and a public anxious for accountability, exchanged glances that spoke volumes. Minji's heart soared as she witnessed the dawning realization among the authorities. This was not just another high-stakes corporate defense, but an upheaval of power that could shift the very foundation upon which K Group was built. As murmurs intensified, Taehwan's cold demeanor began to crack, his bravado waning as the reality of his impending downfall set in. The judge observed, noting the palpable shift in the dynamics of the room, and with a heavy yet resolute voice, she announced that proceedings would continue, unwavering in the commitment to uphold justice. However, before Taehwan was led away by the authorities, he turned to Jaiwan, his face a mask of unyielding contempt. He leaned closer, malice woven into his words, asserting that power, once so intricately woven into the fabric of his life, would never truly dissipate but would instead morph into a new visage, perhaps a reflection of Jaiwan himself. Power never truly disappears. It just finds a new face, he proclaimed ominously, his voice laced with the undying venom of his legacy. Minji felt the impact of Taehwan's words reverberate through the air, chilling and captivating, as uncertainty curled in the pit of her stomach. She exchanged a glance with Jaiwan, his expression torn between rage and a dawning understanding that wielding influence required more than mere birthright. With the courtroom now buzzing with anticipation and the real path to healing emerging, Minji realized that this was not merely an end, but the beginning of a new chapter, one where they would not only confront their adversities but would also embrace the journey to reclaim their lives, uncovering truths that embodied the essence of who they were meant to become. In that moment, as their newfound connection pulsed with both fear and hope, she understood clearly that while they may have inherited the shadows of their fathers, together they would dismantle those shadows, turning them into something profoundly transformative, possibly even beautiful. With Taehwan's downfall reverberating through the corporate landscape, K Group stands on the brink of transformation. The once imposing empire built on manipulation and fear is now a battleground for loyalty and integrity. Jaiwan stands at the threshold, gazing out at the chaos, caught between the weight of his father's legacy and the promise of a new beginning. He feels the echoes of resentment and betrayal clawing at his conscience, yet in the depths of uncertainty, a flicker of determination ignites within him. He is faced with an agonizing choice: continue the cycle of power that his father crafted or embrace a fresh ideology that values people over profits. His mind races as he remembers Minji's spirit, her fight against the shadows that once consumed her. As Minji steps into the light of a promising future, her heart swells with resilience. No longer shackled by the past, she has learned to carve her own path. Standing by the Han River, the sun kissing the surface like a warm embrace, she reflects on her journey. Memories of her struggles and triumphs intermingle with dreams of what lies ahead. It's in this moment of solitude, filled with serenity and strength, that Jaiwan joins her, the air thick with unspoken words. He stands beside her, the man she once deemed arrogant and untouchable has somehow transformed. His presence is now a mixture of complexity and vulnerability. I told you once that people like you are nothing to me, he murmurs, his gaze fixed ahead, the weight of his admission heavy in the air. He turns to meet her eyes, sincerity lacing his voice as he continues, I was wrong. They share a silence laden with past grievances and uncharted territories that stretch before them. The moment feels monumental, a breath hanging between what has been lost and the infinite possibilities that stretch toward an uncharted horizon. Their lives have intertwined in a way neither had anticipated, a tether of emotions they are both too frightened to name yet so desperately need to explore. As they stand together, resolute in the presence of their shadows, a sudden commotion interrupts their contemplation. A rumor spreads throughout the elite circles, whispers of alliances forged and enemies lurking in plain sight. The corporate world is not done with Minji and Jaiwan just yet. Unbeknownst to them, the consequences of their choices will ripple through the lives of those connected to K Group and beyond, igniting a new fire within the dangerous game they are now a part of. As the sun sinks lower, casting an amber glow on their entwined fates, they step away from the river, united in the face of adversity yet divided by their fears. It is a beginning they both yearn for, but the end of their story is only the beginning of something that promises to unravel further chaos and dazzling revelations. K Group is on the cusp of a revolution, and the stakes are higher than ever. With their hearts racing against time, they must now confront the past shadows to claim their future, a future that is as thrilling as it is uncertain, and one that beckons not to be missed. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe to Happiness of Love. That way, you won't miss any of our heartfelt romances. See you in the next love story.